Good morning, council members, staff, and members of the public. It is Tuesday, September 16th at 9 a.m., and I would like to call this meeting of the Policy and Strategy Committee to order and begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Welcome. Today we have regrets from Councillor Kathy Moore and Councillor Casey DeLong. Are there any announcements, acknowledgements, or recognitions from around the table? Okay. Seeing none, moving along in our agenda to public input. I don't see any members in our gallery for public input today, but I would like to remind everybody that public input is one of several opportunities for the public to engage with council. Residents are welcome to use the public input portion of the meeting to share their thoughts with the council on municipal topics that are important to them. Are there any changes or approval of the agenda today? Seeing none, I'll call for approval of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Hubley, seconded by Councillor Brooks. All those in favor? Opposed? The agenda is approved. We have a set of minutes from July 15th, 2025. Are there any errors or omissions from those minutes? Seeing none, we'll call those minutes approved. Moving down to business arising from the minutes, and our Deputy CAO, Alex Demerick, is going to respond to some of the public input from a previous meeting.
Yes, thank you to the Deputy Mayor, and good morning, council members. So at our July 15th meeting, we had a resident come and provide some information and ask about the municipality's climate change plan and how it relates to natural storage. So just going to provide a little bit of background before providing some information in response to a couple of specific inquiries. So natural carbon storage is a process where things like woodlands or farmlands are capturing climate from the environment and storing it in biomass or in the earth. And natural carbon storage is accounted for in Environment Canada's annual National Inventory Report, which does inventories on climate emissions they're grouped into 5 different sectors. So the one that's relevant to us is the net land emissions. So as I mentioned, this does include forests, which are capturing carbon from the environment, and farmlands, but it's a net calculation. So it also includes things like forest fires, which obviously release carbon and then lose the capacity to store. And then woodlands, farmlands, so croplands capture carbon, but soil disturbances and things that lower yields, so things like infestations or droughts, reduce the ability for farmlands to store naturally carbon that's in the environment. So net land emissions for Canada were actually a very small contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, making up 4.2 megatons of our total emission count, which is far higher at 694 megatons. That data is from 2023. So with respect to MODL's climate plan, our baseline emissions follows Canadian practice under the Partners for Climate Protection, or PCP, protocol. So existing forest and wetland carbon stocks aren't added to the community total, and this is to avoid double counting with the federal emissions inventory. So there are also some points raised regarding the declaration of a climate emergency. So I think it's important to note that while there was a presentation in 2019 which resulted in council discussing a climate emergency, that wasn't the beginning of climate work in the municipality. Just as one example, in 2010, the council passed an integrated community sustainability plan. So that covered a wide range of sustainability items, including reducing emissions. So in response to that public presentation, council looked for a staff report That included costs that might be incurred to research the issue as well as developing a plan. At the time, those development costs were estimated to be $102,400. Before approving a climate change plan, Council also reviewed estimated budget figures that could be associated with some of the actions in the plan, recognizing that annual budgets would be where those actual expenditures would be approved each year. In terms of costs to implement the plan, operating costs aren't tracked by themes. So we don't have a quick summary to be able to provide a total value of climate work conducted to date. We are able to provide a more accurate estimate on the capital side because those projects are much more easily tracked by themes. So going back to the time frame referenced, since 2019, MODL capital plans have included $1.27 million for climate-related work. And that has also drawn down $457,000 in grants. So that results in a net capital expenditure from MODL of $813,000 since 2019. So the resident had a couple of specific requests as well. First, that council exit the Climate Protection Program, or PCP. After consideration, staff would like to note the program is free to join and provides access to a good source of information, which is one of the sources used to provide information to council. It also provides the framework previously mentioned so that we have a standardized approach and can compare data across jurisdictions. Finally, the other useful element it provides is following the protocol makes it easier for us to access funding, so we can draw down infrastructure dollars by participating in the framework. So we wouldn't recommend exiting that. Again, there were references to ICLEI. As has been previously stated, MODL is not a member of ICLEI. The resident requested that farm and woodlot owners be exempted from property taxes in relation to carbon storage. We should note that forestry and farm practices or taxes are assessed through the Provincial Assessment Act, and they are currently receiving a significant discount in comparison to residential rates. Finally, there was a request relating to writing to the Premier in opposition to offshore wind projects. So it was correctly noted that offshore is managed federally and provincially. However, MODL has consistently taken the position that major projects such as those should involve substantial public engagement and an opportunity for a municipal consultation. So as with all public engagement through our public input, we provide a summary to give some information in response to a resident. If a council member does want to follow up on something further, then the appropriate course of action would be to submit a request for agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. Demerick, for that. And as was pointed out, we respond to questions that come from residents in this manner, specifically because there might be others that are wondering as well. So this council is committed to ensuring that we respond back to residents' concerns, and if we are unable to at the meeting, this is the direction that we've taken to make sure that information gets back to the resident and others who might be interested. We have no referrals from committees or boards, so we're going to go right down to staff reports. In the administration department, we have Jonathan Bertram and Jinwen Wu, who are going to present on the housing strategy. Welcome.
open some more issues. All right, we will note that your agenda package is slightly different from this. We have split it into a more long form and a more short form presentation. The long form has a bit more explanation, a few more slides of just pure background information and some explanations of some of the things going on in the slides. And for the short form, we have removed these, but the content is there for a little bit more information. And of course, there will be a more detailed explanation in the report. Just like to note that before we begin.
Today, we are presenting the outline of the Housing Strategy Report. It's organized into 3 parts: background, issues, and solutions. We'll keep the first 2 brief and spend most of our time on actions and discussion. What we are hoping today is to hear your feedback on these actions, what you are most interested in, and whether you feel the strategy is on the right track as we work toward completing the report. The background section will cover demographics, the current housing market, tables on housing stock estimates and affordability pressures, as well as jurisdiction and authority. Much of the data comes from the Municipal Housing Needs Report released in 2023, along with homelessness data from the South Shore Housing Action Coalition, published in November 2024. The population of Model has been growing in recent years with 2 clear trends. First, the number of seniors is rising quickly, and the municipality's average age is higher than the provincial average. Second, we are seeing more single-person and non-traditional households, including single adults, roommates, and multi-generational families. At the same time, over 1,000 new residents moved to Model, mostly from other provinces. With this growth, housing pressures are rising. According to 2024 data for the South Shore region, which combines Lunenburg and Queens counties, 506 individuals aged 16 and older were experiencing homelessness or housing instability.
So there are a few things to note about the existing housing market. We would like to flag that of the occupied units, there are about 11,505. That's around 90% of the total occupied units, leaving the remaining 10% for rental occupied units. And of the owner occupied units, around 92% of those are single family homes. And of the rental units, around 71% of those are single family homes. There are currently 391 short-term rentals, and our housing construction rates are growing at around 1.1% annually, which, as we will get into later, is currently insufficient to meet demands. And our housing development and organizations are largely characterized as traditional construction, small to medium-sized firms, largely operating locally on small to medium-sized projects, and there is some new modular construction arising. So if we look at this chart, the total private dwellings includes all dwellings. Some of those are not occupied, so what we're largely concerned with are the owner-occupied units and the renter-occupied units. The large story for this is that if we keep the current status quo building pace and extrapolate out to 2030, we will have about 12,715 owner-occupied and 1,295 rental units. The estimates that we have taken here for what we need in order to restore affordability comes from the 2025 CMHC report, and we've taken the data from the Nova Scotia part of that and saw how many new starts we need to restore affordability by supply alone. And if we extrapolate that out to 2030, based on the status quo compared to what is estimated we need, we will end up with around a shortage of 1,908 owner-occupied units and around 212 rental units. And that's assuming that those proportions of around 90 to 10% stay the same.
In 2022, the median home A Model sold for about $335,000. According to the Municipal Housing Needs Report and the CMHC's affordability standards, this means a household would need to earn about $105,400 a year to buy that home. But when we look at the census data, the situation is different. The actual before-tax household income here is closer to $88,000, and 76% of households earn less than the $105,400 income level. If we base affordability on the actual $88,000 income, families could afford homes of around $254,000. That leaves a gap of $51,000 between what people can afford and what homes actually cost.
So before we start talking about actions we can take and things we found in that area, it's worth revisiting briefly the jurisdiction and authority. In general, we have the three levels of government representing three different lenses of looking at things. The federal government has a very broad mandate. They have a lot of loans, grants, tax benefits. Those are the sort of mechanisms they use. One of their main mechanisms is the CMHC, and it has three purposes: to provide research into housing and the housing sector, directly financing and directly investing in the housing sector. And then there's the new entity, the Build Canada Homes, which does a very similar role, but is going to be focusing on affordability and pace of construction. But this is a new entity, so we're less sure about how exactly it'll work. The provincial government, they have a more local interest. They set the framework for municipal government. They set the overall provincial land use planning and the building codes. They are responsible for low income and social housing, the provincial economic policy, and they are largely responsible for a lot of the frameworks like the building codes, the labor and trades management, the education, the labor laws, those sorts of things. The municipality has at the same time a very broad and a very specific mandate. The actual wording in the MGA is that we are responsible for the provision of necessary or desirable things to maintain safe and viable communities. But the largest impact areas we have are infrastructure, water and wastewater, transit, solid waste, recycling, and we can control the development pattern through things like land use planning, setting property taxes.
Here are some key takeaways in the background section. We see an aging population, smaller households, and more people moving in, all contributing to rising housing demand. But home prices have risen much faster than incomes, leaving many families unable to afford even a medium-priced home. When we look at the biggest challenges, three stand out. The first is the lack of overall supply. There simply aren't enough homes. The second is the limited variety of housing units. We need more options to meet different needs. And the third is the lack of non-market support, including affordable housing programs and accessible funding. Housing is part of a broader provincial system and a larger economic and social framework. At the local level, the municipality can manage land use, property taxes, incentives, and infrastructure to encourage development while preserving community character. This strategy should emphasize community well-being, focusing on safe, healthy, and inclusive communities. Next, we'll turn to the issues and challenges sections to look at these problems in more detail. In this section, we look at findings from academic research to highlight key concerns. We also include the issues raised by 4 groups of stakeholders we interviewed: academics, private developers, nonprofit housing providers, and supportive nonprofits.
So, for the academic research into housing, there are 2 main areas to flag. The first are government programs, and the second is the involvement with private markets. So the large story is that there is a mismatch between the programs that exist and especially the rural needs. A lot of these programs are designed for urban areas, and so they tend not to match up very well with rural areas. The biggest problem with this is that rural construction costs tend to be slightly higher or the same, while the homes created tend to be sold for less. So there's a real mismatch from the private market about what is profitable to build. Since, for decades now, we've had a primarily private development focused solution to a lot of these problems. And due to the profit motives of private developers, it is very difficult to change development patterns on the whole, and incentives for the private market tend to focus on new builds, while we know that the bulk of affordable housing stock tends to come from older housing stock. And finally, this has both interacted with a lack of strong frameworks, especially from the provincial side, but also the federal, looking to kind of guide this, and we are now ramping up our, from the provincial and federal side, we are now focusing far more on building pace and construction pace.
When we spoke with private developers, financing came up right away. Financing barriers include high interest loans, upfront infrastructure costs, limited mid-scale project funding, and rising land prices. Even though the cost of construction is similar in rural areas, home prices there are typically lower, which reduces the incentive to build. Developers told us the permitting system is fragmented and unpredictable. Projects need multiple approvals with no clear timelines, and feedback often comes back in pieces. What they want is a process that's reliable and transparent. As one put it, we want to be builders, not office clerks. They also pointed to outdated regulations. Septic rules don't allow shared systems across lots, so every loan needs its own tank. A large system that could serve 50 units and spread the $800,000 cost isn't permitted, making multi-unit housing far less viable.
When we started interviewing the nonprofit housing providers, the main problem is that they are non-market firms trying to function in a private market system. So the largest barrier was the quick access to capital. They are able to get capital eventually, but it's that quick access. There are pre-development costs, there are site evaluations, there are permits that have to be obtained, there are designs that have to be submitted, and doing all of that and trying to do it faster than a private firm is unfeasible. So by the time they have their application together, by the time they've been approved by funding, most ideal spots for building have already been taken. So that is the largest barrier for non-profit housing developers. The funding itself is often tied to the actual construction process, so there's a gap between when they are putting together a proposal and when the construction actually starts. For the navigational and supportive organizations, they had a broader interest. They identify a few different concerns, but the main theme is that people's experience, especially if there's experience accessing these services, don't line up with how the services work themselves. People think regionally, they think around where they are, but services are often provided either with strict borders or they're municipally, and people don't tend to think that they're crossing a municipal jurisdiction, but that is how those programs are delivered, with hard jurisdictions. Another problem that they identify is the inconsistencies between the inconsistencies created by uncertain funding structures. Often these programs require 6 months or 12-month reapplications. So there's an uncertainty that a program will continue to exist, making planning hard. And for the folks accessing it, there is an uncertainty that the program will exist when they need it. So there is a little bit of a capacity mismatch where these organizations are kind of trying to do everything. And if they're interested in housing, they're trying to be builders, trying to be managers, trying to run the services. And one of the folks we interviewed said that they wish we had a system that let the people who know what they're doing do it best, and had a little bit more security in funding structures and negotiations with specific organizations so that they would be more secure to specialize into what they're actually good at.
When we look across all the interviews, a few key themes stand out. First, financing remains a big challenge. Private developers struggle with high interest loans, upfront costs, and very limited mid-scale funding, while nonprofits don't have quick access to capital or the money needed just to get projects off the ground. There are also regulatory and institutional gaps. Outdated and overly complex rules slow down projects, and without strong provincial frameworks like land trusts or centralized housing programs, there's little coordination to move solutions forward. Finally, we heard about the tension between financial pressures and community building. Housing is too often driven by development and profit considerations, but people want supportive communities with services, parks, and places where life feels safe and connected. In short, fulfilling the goal of building safe and viable communities means encouraging housing development while keeping community well-being and quality of life at the center.
Following from our background research and the interviews we've had with folks involved in these sorts of fields, we now would like to move beyond what we found in our research and move towards a series of directions and actions that we think might begin to address some of these problems.
Our general directions focus on creating an environment for growth. That means continuing to expand infrastructure and regional investment in model service centers. At the same time, we want to make it easier for the private sector to double housing stocks. And just as importantly, we need strong non-market housing by supporting community organizations with the wraparound resources they need to provide affordable units.
So the general direction is an environment for growth. The biggest part of this puzzle is that every single person involved in this needs infrastructure. They need the ability to grow. If they have a plan or have a program that they would like to do, but there is not the capacity to support that program, it can't be done. So in general, we would like to focus our infrastructure investments in and around the existing modal service centers. And this will have to involve collaboration with partner municipalities to expand the supply of centrally serviced land. Part of this could be agreeing to jointly invest in infrastructure and share tax revenue, because there are always concerns about where the growth is happening and where the benefits from that growth will go. But the experience is that any improvement is felt by all of the surrounding communities. We would like to see a land bank established as well. This could take two general paths. One is far more active, where the land bank would acquire, improve, and sell land to interested parties. And then a more limited way of doing it would be to simply manage and dispense existing municipal land. And finally, it's important to complete the process of establishing a comprehensive land use plan. This has two main benefits. One is it establishes the vision of where the community is going. And the second is that predictability is very important. For every group we talk to, they want predictability above all else, because no developer likes surprises. It's important to know where that area is going so you can accurately plan what you want to put in that area.
For the private market, our first direction is land. We plan to continue making municipal land available for development and to coordinate with other municipalities to expand the supply and of central serviced land. We also want to promote development through supportive measures. That means allowing higher density zoning with clear rules so developers can build as of right where appropriate. We are also continuing roundtable discussions with provincial departments to encourage faster and more consistent processing of applications. Another area is flexibility. The municipality's role is to support and create space for good ideas. That means being open to conversations with local companies and developers and being willing to support proposals, whether it's modular housing, rent-to-own models, or other non-government initiatives. Finally, we plan to advocate for policies that are beyond municipal control. This includes septic system requirements and minimum lot sizes at the provincial level, as well as CMHC and Build Canada Homes program rules. We want to push for affordability standards that reflect rural differences, for example, Bridgewater compared to more deeply rural areas, and for reforms to reduce minimum project size requirements so that smaller scale developments can qualify for funding. When we talk about infrastructure, it's not just works underground. In our urban and suburban areas, we also need the complete services that make neighborhoods livable. Things like active transportation, transit connections, and other amenities. And on the permitting side, we've already rolled out a regional e-permitting project, which is helping to simplify approvals and reduce delays. In our rural and deeply rural areas, the challenges look different. One key tool here is secondary dwelling units. We can both encourage and facilitate this type of development. Incentives can help homeowners add units, and the municipality can also act as a navigator, connecting residents with the provincial secondary and backyard field incentive funding program and helping them through the process. We can also reduce barriers by streamlining subdivision requirements, for example, making private road standards clear so the process would be simple.
For non-market housing organizations, we would like to be a catalyst for the activity that's already there. We have found that there is interest in expanding these services and creating more services like this, but they often run into some problem or another. So we would like to perhaps adjust the policies if we, say, establish a land bank to prioritize access to municipal land. This would help alleviate some of the problems of the quickness of available funding. We would also like to create a pre-development grant funding program. This is a relatively small grant funding program that is only intended to bridge the gap from pre-development to shovels in the ground, where the larger programs, their funding kicks in. And we would also like to act as a facilitator between existing groups. This may take the form of having navigator facilitation services for existing groups, operating collective site viewings so that the organizations that are best suited for a development are the ones who start working on that development or decide to partner on a development. We could host or support development negotiations, new partnerships, mergers between organizations. We could also do this for regional roundtables or information settings about how to navigate and work within the municipality to get their goals done. We would also like to establish a guide for how Modal will evaluate development proposals. This will allow some clarity and give these organizations a little bit more information before they start coming to council with new questions. So this would outline what supports are available, what conditions are necessary for those supports, and how can Modal help throughout the process. And finally, we would like to see a rebate program established that mirrors the current income-scaled property tax exemption program. That program is currently limited to homeowners and allows some property tax exemptions for providing units. That could be extended to non-market housing for provision of affordable units. And finally, after this, we would like to also flag a few actions and directions we do not recommend. These are both a result of research, interviews, and the direction that council has given us. And we'd like to be very careful with what specifically we're proposing here. So first of all, we would like to recommend against pursuing ownership of housing. This would involve either the municipality itself constructing units, the municipality itself owning or providing deep supports of low-income housing, or the municipality itself owning rental market housing. Second, we would like to recommend against directly financing residences housing. This would be for either providing loans and grants for mortgage payments, or owning and operating some sort of rent-to-own or rental program. And finally, we would like to recommend against directly financing market rate housing. This is market rate specifically, and that sometimes takes the form of providing loans or grants for firms to build market rate housing, or granting tax exemptions for market rate housing operators. We would like to see those either tied to specific incentives or tied to affordable unit provision.
This slide is our summary table. It brings together all the different actions we've discussed, organized into 3 categories: general actions, private market actions, and non-market housing actions. On the left side is the list of options, which you can think of as a kind of checklist. It's designed to give you a clear overview of everything in one place and to invite your feedback on which actions you feel are most important or most feasible. On the right side, we've included implementation timelines and budgets. Some actions are already underway or even complete, while others are planned for the next few years. In terms of budget, some actions cost very little and can be incorporated into future staff work plans. Others, however, require larger investments, for example, improving transit connections or setting up a pre-development fund.
So sorry.
In terms of next steps, here's the plan. We'll polish up the draft strategy and get a version ready to share, then bring it forward for public engagement in November. After that, the council will have a chance to review it and make any refinements. The goal is to adopt the finalized housing strategy by November or December 2025.
The public engagement part of this, we intend to occur throughout November. It'll involve 2 main actions. One will be to create an Engage page so that there's an information dispersal. This will have short video presentations explaining what we are doing, how we are doing it, what we intend to implement, and provide the option to provide online feedback through that Engage service. The second would be directly holding open houses to speak with residents, hear their concerns, one north of the 103 highway and one south. This will involve short presentations explaining the program and maybe having tables to discuss council's preferred actions or possible ways of approaching this. However, the actual form of this is under development still. So, now that we've given a lot of information and a lot of possible ways of approaching this, we'd like to hear some discussion about where this can go next and how you feel about some of the directions or actions proposed.
Thank you for providing that slideshow. We've been talking about housing for as long as I've been around this table, and I'm sure other councillors are experiencing that as well. Questions, comments for our presenters? Councillor Brooks.
Thank you guys very much for the detailed report today. I appreciate what you've brought forward. Two of the pieces that stand out to me, the septic one is really an important one to pursue. So I thank you guys for highlighting that. And I know it's going to be back up to the province that we need to do it, but it's a really important one. Are you familiar with the name Marcel Lebrun?
Not by name, but maybe by work.
Yeah, so he's a name I had hoped would get back to you guys and the staff. He's a gentleman in New Brunswick. They've just built the 96th home. They delivered it April 16th. He's building small home communities in Fredericton, and he's taking some really novel approaches. And I would hope that we could reach out to him and pick his brain a little bit, because what he's doing is pretty special. The other piece that I'll just say really quickly, we're missing this component of skilled trades, and it was a conversation I've tried to have both here and at the provincial level, which is there may even be some strategizing with a temporary migratory skilled force that comes to do the same kind of temporary work that other workers do, but to help with our housing shortage. It's one that would require municipal and provincial conversations, but I think it's a good one, because we're just not going to produce enough builders in time to meet this demand. So thank you guys, those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, it's such a detailed report, and I really appreciate all the work that you've put into it, and I think you've followed up on a lot of the things that we talked about when this last came forward. I just want to point out that Marcel Lebrun, I think, is connected to 12 Neighbors,
Okay.
which you did bring forward in the first session. And just to connect with that, Councillor Hubley and I met with some folks in her district called Sycamore Tiny Homes, and they have some fabulous, ideas and energy around the same kind of the same model of project that 12 Neighbors is, with the wraparound supports. And anyway, I think there's a lot of energy out there in our communities to make some changes. I did want to note a few things. I really love the land bank components, and look forward to seeing more about what our policies might look like on that. Two things that I felt were kind of absent. We've talked a lot about farmland and food security, and I was just wondering if there's any way to work in some either recognition of that issue, that people have a hard time accessing housing and land for farming, and what solutions there might be. I wish I had them, but we have talked about farmland banking before at this table, but not in conversation with you two. And the other thing I wanted to note was around deeply rural. I often think about how our housing stock is very old, and efficiency is a really good tie-in to think about, because if people have access to financing programs that they can improve that housing stock, then the housing becomes more affordable and attainable, because you can buy, an old house that the wind is whistling through, and and you can work towards lowering those really high energy bills. And also, like, I understand why we are prioritizing transportation in town and suburban areas, but I would like to see recognition that that's also a really important consideration for housing in the more deeply rural areas. And people, even though we do have Lunenburg County Wheels, people do continue to struggle to access it when they need it. And that transportation helps older people stay in their communities so much longer. So, yeah, I'd just like to see that as part of our plans, even if it's not, you know, the priority for the next budget year.
Mayor McLean-Weil.
I have a couple of different questions, so I'll just start with the numbers. Nobody likes to spend time on numbers, but I do. Partly because we're relying on data from 2021. And it is, you worked with what you could access, and it is problematic when you start to project the numbers, but even if we modify the numbers, there's still a significant gap, which we can see. We know that next year, I think, is a census year, so we will have updated numbers. But often I hear from people about, you know, the growth in the area, and we know during COVID we had an influx of people. The province has already seen a decrease in the net migration into the province, and most of that was related to interprovincial changes, some by the immigration program, but we also know that those numbers have declined. So I just wonder about modifying these numbers, and if you've tried, if you've kind of looked at what those might be. I think I have said, and I think others support this, that this area, because we are within that 100-kilometer radius of HRM, will continue to be a growth area, but not at the level we experienced probably during COVID. The anecdotal information you hear is from the real estate agents is that the market is still pretty strong here. The inventory is low, and that is reflected in your numbers. But the province, you know, will release these population numbers, and I just wonder if you can speak to those numbers and where they access them, and our inability to really use much beyond 2021 census data. And that, because the province seems to have, you know, they'll come out and announce, oh, we've crossed the million number. Mm-hmm. Like, where are they getting those numbers when, you know, we have access to census? So if you just can kind of speak to the numbers a little bit, I'd appreciate that.
Absolutely. We would like to have a better answer than we do, and you rightly say we are relying heavily on the 2021 census, which at this point is almost certainly out of date. We are hoping the 2026 census will update that, as well as the Turner Drake study currently underway, to get a more accurate picture of the local, you know, housing and business market. The provincial numbers, we are not sure. Often, you know, we don't have access to the studies they're doing or the consultants they are consulting. So we can't necessarily speak to any specific provincial number, but as you say, there's a lot of anecdotal and, you know, folks working in real estate or in development or in support services saying that the demand is never going to maintain that peak that it was early on, but that it will remain strong, especially because we are in that commuter shed. We expect those to be modified slightly. The overall predictions we're hoping are fairly consistent, as many of the here's what you need to do to solve it kind of estimates assumed that there was immediate action and that they would take account to like an average of 5 to 10 years. So we were hoping that in the end the average numbers hold out by, say, 2030. But yes, of course, these are meant to be sort of preliminary estimates, a general overview. Anecdotally, we are seeing that there is that general trend, but it will be hard to quantify until we have just hard updated information. And unfortunately, that is often a result of, do you have the cost to go out and do the studies?
Our deputy CAO also has a comment to make on that.
Just in relation to data remaining fresh, I think some of the real value that your housing policy team has brought forward is they've identified 2 key variables for you, which can be updated every time you get a new piece of census data, or if you get updates on population or housing market from other sources. And so those 2 key areas to focus on is the CMHC identifying that there, with the shortage, you want to see a doubling of starts. So our numbers, we're building an average of 150 units a year. And so the CMHC data, we're looking at a number of 235. We have a gap to get to where they're suggesting that we go to. So those numbers can be updated every time you get it. Similarly, what that translates to on the affordability front is a gap of $71,000 a year in terms of household budget. So they've been able to quantify for you, based on admittedly some older data, what that gap is looking like. Something to remember is the timing of that. It's a 2021 census, but the data is collected in 2020. So you're not seeing some of the more significant population pressures that we saw. And so you have the decrease in interprovincial migration, which was the main driver of our population growth. But then you also have these changes in the housing market. So it's possible that they're counteracting each other, but either way, we're continuing to see a shortage of units, low inventory on the resale market. That's driving the gap in terms of units available. And we've now been able to quantify what that affordability gap is. So those numbers can be updated, and you can check in at the very least on a 5-year basis on, have our actions been working towards narrowing that affordability gap? And if not, obviously you need to have some readjustment there.
The secondary question, Mayor?
Yeah, if I may on that. First of all, I think it really does give us, and thank you for the work, because it does quantify it in a way that, like those numbers about the housing gap, in my head and my rudimentary calculations, it's pretty well right on with what I, in my own head, had. I was using a number around 80,000 for the income, and, you know, so it does really quantify it in a way now that we can really use those numbers, and I think that is very, very useful. It's also a way that when we're starting to advocate for this, our residents can really understand this, because we can put it in numbers that they can really relate to, particularly for those who are looking for a house. So I really thank you for that. And to your point, I think it's really good. We can update it with numbers as they become available. And regardless of what the numbers are, even if they change a little, there's such a gap that we know we've got issues. So I think that's really important as we move forward on this.
Councillor Oikel.
Thank you. On your housing stock estimates, it says data from the Municipal Housing Needs Report. Is that our housing needs report, or just municipal as in general?
Nope, that is for modal.
Okay.
That was, yeah, the 2023, and they use a lot of the 2021 census information as well.
Councillor Burns.
Thank you. I have a quick comment and then just a process question after that, if that's okay. The comment was just what I appreciated here was how this highlights that there's a spectrum of solutions based on what type of housing we're going to be targeting here, that there's non-market housing, that there's private development, and that there's very distinct solutions for the two. I think with a lot of residents, conversations about them kind of mix, and then people fight about what kind of solution you want. And in my opinion, it's kind of like talking to an economist. The reason they tell you 5 different things is because there isn't quite one lever that works on its own. You pull all the levers when it's important and hope it fixes it. And so I think having multiple levers here that are within our control that we can start to pull are a positive thing. I especially liked what we're talking about streamlining the point there about subdivisions and development and making a very clear roadmap that works, whether you're doing it by traditional subdivision or condominium development agreement, making it simple for people to look at, understand, and say, this is what I need to do, depending on which road I go down. The other question I had was just about prior to the public engagement. Does the public engagement essentially take what we discussed here today out to the public, or is there a separate report that would go to the public, or a separate format? The reason being, I think it would just be helpful for council as a whole to look at it ahead of time. I just wouldn't want a repeat of the kind of experience that land use planning had, where I don't want to be in a position where I would then go against what is probably 90% good work and 10% also good work that I might just otherwise say we should present in a different way before the public. I wouldn't want to lose the narrative of what we're trying to do by playing defense on the issue politically. So I guess my question is just, I support it going to public engagement. Is there a deliverable that we should see ahead of time to make that engagement smoother and we can support it better? Or what's the next step on that?
I think our deputy CEO has a response to that.
Today is the day. That's what we're doing here, is that Jonathan and Jinwan have put an enormous amount of work into this. So you can see how they've defined the issue for you, where they see the areas that need effort, and then they've outlined some draft options for what they think are reasonable municipal actions given the jurisdictional limits that you have. So if council is not comfortable with some of the suggestions that they have in there, or you think that we've missed the mark, we need that direction today, because it's our intention from here to boil this down even further so it's more easily digested from members of the public, and then go out for consultation based on the content that's in your slides today.
Thank you. That's what I was suspecting, but I just wanted to make sure before I made a fool of myself. So what I'd suggest, and the only change would just, there's the bullet point in there about the subdivision regulations, and if there's anything that's being proposed or anything that could be proposed in that we enumerate that out a little bit. I think, like, I just personally am exposed to a disproportionate amount of smaller developers who are more interested in solutions in that world, because that's the world they play in. And I suspect I can think of some of the folks who will be coming out and talking about it, and they'll probably put a disproportionate amount of energy in there when we talk about roads, limits on subdivisions before you need different approvals, whether it's 3 subdivisions or 5, development agreements, what are the limits on those. So if there's anything that's going to be proposed, or if it's just, here are the things we would like your input on with regard to regulations regarding subdivisions, development agreements, condominium, like all of that whole piece, finding a way to direct the energy that will come into that, and here are things that could be considered here, will go a long way in having a productive consultation on that. Did I make that clear enough?
No, it's on the nose. In terms of changes to the subdivision process, council has done extensive work on that in terms of the cluster development process, and that's intended to mirror subdivision, so that regardless, as you pointed out, regardless of your model, you're dealing with a consistent set of rules. The key improvement that we see from the municipal perspective is on the private road standards, so that there's clarity of what that construction standard is and the process to get through to it. And we see that as the opportunity for allowing for more deeply rural housing, because those are developers who will be doing short private road type construction.
And specifically, the exact point I expect to be brought up will be, at what number of subdivisions does the private road standard kick in? Is it 2, 3, 4, 5, et cetera? So that's just the point that I figure will come up. So just more of a heads up for engagement than anything else.
The secondary piece to that is around the lot sizes, which is tied to septic. So not fully in municipal control, but something that we could certainly include as a point that we would like to see change, so that the regulations reflect the technologies that are currently available.
Councillor Brooks.
One piece that I hope we can think about for all of this, our Deputy CEO just mentioned the term affordability gap. And I still feel like we're not having the whole conversation on this, because we have an item that has a cost and we have an individual who can pay or not pay that cost. But that's a binary choice. So we could have an individual making more money, we could have the house costing less, but that's some of the tension. I think one of the things, and I mentioned it to an individual last year, and I can't remember who I tried to send it to, but the idea, if we're going to be involved in non-market housing, the concept of rent to own. So the idea of really taking individuals who are working, have never missed a rent payment in their life, and really being good candidates for a rent to own scenario, because it's better to have people housed and working towards home ownership than living under bridges, frankly. So we keep having this conversation about affordability. I think we have a really neat opportunity to show that, I mean, we wouldn't be the first. I spoke with a nonprofit down in the Bahamas. They've been doing this for a number of years, and there are people willing to talk to us about this, about rent to own. I know we have limited capacity as the municipality. It's again probably something to engage with the province, but for our economic situation here, it could be a really important piece where, that balance tips. As soon as somebody pays 51%, that home is theirs, and they begin to build equity, and it's a different scenario. So, apart from trying to have affordability of 2,000, 2,500 square foot houses, which is probably not a big part of our solution, we need to look at the whole picture. So how do we get humans into houses? So I would really hope that, we can have those conversations with people who are willing to share that information, because it's working in other parts of the world.
Yeah, to speak to that, it comes up in two different areas. The first is as private actions, partnering with organizations doing rent to own. That is absolutely a reasonable thing to look into. You did send us your Bahamian example for the rent to home program. These are, exciting, new, interesting ways of achieving home ownership and affordability. And we do absolutely recommend that the municipality should be engaged if there's an organization interested in doing this or interested in partnering with the municipality. The converse side of it is that if we are to operate a rent to own ourselves, that will require the municipality owning housing. And that is something that council can pursue, but council has expressed before that there is not a strong desire for the direct ownership of housing, and operating a rent to own ourselves would require ownership of housing and management of housing. And those are two things that we currently don't do, and they would reflect additional costs, additional programs that we are operating. So we have the two sides of it. On one hand, doing it ourselves would require these things that would necessarily change how council and modal operates. On the other hand, if there are organizations who are doing a rent-to-own model and that is something they pursue, and they're interested in setting one up in modal itself, that is absolutely something we would recommend working with them, figuring out how it's going to work, finding ways that we could support that. So there are the two sides of it.
And just to be clear, I'm advocating for the second, to find partnerships with people who are doing this. I don't want modal to be homeowners, but I do want us to be strong advocates for the solutions wherever we can. So thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, and maintaining flexibility in how we approach those negotiations or partnerships, absolutely there are opportunities there.
Councillor Oikle.
So many a times I have mentioned about specific wording. And non-market housing, I know that we're all talking about below market housing, correct?
No.
No.
A little more expansive.
Okay.
That's one part of it.
Okay, because above market housing is also available in our municipality. So that would also be classified as non-market because it's above, right? So I'm just thinking that maybe saying non-market housing actions so that it can't be interpreted incorrectly or abused in any way, that maybe it needs to be a little bit more specific in the wording. I'm just feeling that,
So
Our Deputy CEO.
This actually might be my fault. I gave our housing team specific direction not to go back over the definitions because we did those in July, but now you're missing that small piece of context. So market housing is anything where you have private market going on. So it could be very expensive, well above average costs, or it could be older stock, as our team has referenced, that are generally more affordable. Non-market is referencing any form of housing that is outside of that market-based spectrum. So it could be low-income housing provided by the provincial government. It could be a nonprofit society providing low-income housing, but it could also be a co-op. So it's not necessarily providing low-income housing, but it is non-market in that it's not a unit that you will then buy and sell on the private sector. It's a set of houses or units that are available, and you can become a member of the co-op, and you're not building equity, but you are accessing reliably affordable housing over the long term. So there are just a couple of different examples of what like a non-market housing setup could look like. And just to come back to Councillor Brooks's point, that the intention of the strategy is to be open and prepared to engage with any form of community group that has a concept that might address your affordability gap. So you see in their comments around receptiveness to innovative approaches. When you do have a community group come forward, you have key pieces put in place. Yes, you have the wraparound services, so you're providing navigation, facilitation, connecting them to other groups, connecting them to private developers who have some experience doing that. But then a central piece there is you have, they're proposing a pre-development grant so that you can support these groups that want to provide unique examples. You can directly support them to get their feasibility studies done, to get right of first refusal on lands, whatever it is they need to get to that point where they can make application to those federal provincial pots that are actually providing subsidized units or providing construction grants, so that you as a municipality are really engaged and you're fostering all sorts of activity, but you don't have to be the primary funder, which isn't and hasn't been for a long time the municipality's responsibility.
It needs to be those words need to be part of the presentation to the residents, including the definitions and including what you had just said regarding Councillor Brooks's comments.
Yeah, good points to add. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, one point that I had wanted to make is that exactly around non-market housing and how we talk about this. I think I've been door to door in multiple elections, and I can tell you, when you say non-market housing, people do not know what you're talking about in the county, especially in rural parts of the county, because we just don't have a culture of non-market housing, and it's very hard to it's very hard to explain it. I mean, Alex just did a great job, but I think we really need to be out front with educational materials so that people can kind of seize on what it is we're talking about, and we can kind of change the culture a little bit around when we think of housing, what are the opportunities and options. And the second point I wanted to make is kind of very specific around the secondary suite program. And I think what you had said was something about helping facilitate or topping up around the provincial program. And I just wanted to note that I've heard some negative feedback about that program. So I just want to make sure that we're not aligning too closely with a program that's not working, or that we're talking to the province and saying, this is why it's not working. And I think one of the primary reasons it's not working is because they have bad numbers for the Western region. So the incentives they're using are based on very low rental numbers. So the math just doesn't add up when somebody puts in a suite and then charges someone rent. It doesn't pay for, it just does, the math just doesn't add up. So I would just be careful about that one. And I would be really interested in knowing how many successful applicants there have been from this area based on our numbers. Love the idea, but we've got to be talking to the province about how to make it work here.
Mayor McLean-Weil.
The second thing I wanted to talk about was some of the conversations I've had in the community around I'll call it the pre-development support. And I think that that's really important. I attended a couple of meetings that were titled Beyond Band-Aids, which was brought together a variety of community groups from across many related to the town, but servicing both the town and the municipality. And many of our community groups, and I think I've said this at a council meeting, are exhausted, and they have no more capacity or the expertise, because they're focused on delivering particular programs. But so many of them have identified housing in some form, the full range of housing needs in our community, and recognizing that that's fundamental to getting people beyond some of the situations they're in. But they don't have, as I said, they don't have the expertise or the capacity. They're exhausted, and even the thoughts of trying to bring groups together to start looking at this on top of all their other work is beyond what many of them can even see doing. So I think the pre-development grants are really important for, first of all, to support finding the right people that might be able to work on this, and also to look at what some of those pre-development costs are. And I think in this area, finding people that have expertise in housing projects that aren't in the private, directed to the private sector, that are more in this non-market housing field, because that takes a particular kind of expertise, because what you're doing is organizing the community, and that takes a different set of skills combined with a knowledge of the housing structure and financing and how you access all those programs. So I really think that the two things here that really resonate for me, beyond the streamlining our processes within the municipality, is the land bank. I think that's something we can do, and that helps us in securing land as we plan out our infrastructure. Hopefully we'll be planning that out, working in conjunction with our municipal partners. But the second one is that these pre-development grants, I think that could really help kickstart immediately some projects here.
Councillor Brooks.
Just as today's the day to vent all of this stuff, one of the things you commented on was, beginning of trying to focus infrastructure around existing infrastructure, and I obviously understand the reasons for that. Some of the constituent comments that I had in the last year with regards to housing is a concern that it's all going to be warehouse and all centralized like Osprey Village. So part of going back to the septic system, I think part of the real essential need for that septic change is that if we're going to have little senior villages and mixed age villages and little communities throughout our municipality, we're not just warehousing here in Bridgewater, because I have spoken to many individuals who live by themselves in big homes who would love to get out of those big homes, and they are not moving to Bridgewater. So part of our solution has got to be, we cannot just take the opportunity to warehouse people who've lived in their communities forever. So it is one of our challenges. And so models that we are able to bring into our communities are going to be appreciated by our constituents. When they feel like they're being warehoused, we're gonna have resistance.
And just on to that, tying in the land bank really will give us some direction on that with what's out there and what's available. Yeah. Councillor Oikel.
Yes, I heard the exact same things that Councillor Brooks mentioned in my district, that people have their homes and they're elderly, they want to downsize, but they don't want to go into an apartment in Bridgewater. They want to stay in their community but have a smaller home, little bit of land to tinker around on, grow a few vegetables, but nothing big, and they would really like to be able to stay in their communities, but in smaller homes.
Councillor Reinhardt.
Thanks for all the work. It's a really great comprehensive view of the direction we need to go in, I think. But just to bounce off what has been said, I'm really interested in the backyard and secondary suite program. I'm sure there have been some bumps in the process, so I'd be interested in learning more about that. But it's been brought up to me in so many different situations for a deeply rural solution for, aging parents who want to, stay in the community, for families who may have a family member with a disability as a way to support them. So I'd really like us to look into that and work on how that can become a viable solution with the province. And I think the federal government just recently announced a lot more funding available for secondary suite programs as well.
Any further comments or questions? Not seeing any, but in order for staff to proceed with the next stage of this, they do require direction by way of a motion, and there is one on the floor if somebody would like to put that forward. Councillor Oikel.
To the Chair, Deputy Mayor Vino, and members of the committee, I move that the Policy and Strategy Committee direct staff to proceed with public engagement on the draft housing strategy in November of 2025 and bring the feedback back to Council for review prior to the adoption of the housing strategy, and I so move.
Is there a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Mayor McLean-Weil. Any further discussion? Councillor Smith.
Yes, sorry, there was something that I had wanted to ask about about public engagement. If it seems like you're developing the public engagement for it now, can we bring forward ideas, or is this kind of the last place to do it? I guess for myself, I would like to see some virtual sessions. I know that can be difficult, but I definitely would like to see more than 2 open houses. And I think this is one of the most important things that we're doing. And I'm not sure how many people know that we're doing it. And, our land use strategy has really taken up a lot of the air time, as it should. But this is just as important. And yeah, that communications piece is going to be so important. So I'm happy to see Sarah coming forward.
Yeah, if you would like to add a virtual session, we have not found them super successful in the last little while. What we've found more success is putting a presentation that we've pre-recorded online and then letting people give their feedback. With the Model 2040, almost no one attended the virtual sessions, but then thousands of people watched the YouTube video and then submitted comments. So, but I'm looking to council as a whole for direction on that.
Just a comment, I think we should try again. I think that virtual sessions, I attend so many webinars. Maybe that's just me, but I think we shouldn't discount them because Model 2040 wasn't working, because I think you need to look at that. We need to look at that in the context of we were doing open houses in every district. And we were doing Thursday afternoons here at Modal, so there were so many opportunities for people to come and talk in person. So I just think the virtual, we shouldn't give up on the virtual approach.
Councillor Hubley.
I'm not suggesting that we give up on the virtual approach, but I did attend every virtual meeting that we held for Modal 2040, and people just weren't attending virtually. I think that when you do the pre-recording, they can do it at their leisure. It's not a certain time, it's not a certain day. I can listen to this and give my feedback when it's convenient for me. I think we're getting a lot more opinion by putting the pre-recording out there versus the virtual. just because I've attended so many. So I agree with your recommendation.
And of course, we would do the pre-recorded also. So even if we were doing a virtual, we would still go with that tactic of having that, definitely still have that on there.
So the motion on the table reflects just public engagement. It doesn't specifically say what, where, when. I'm going to look to our deputy CEO to see if we need to make any changes or where we go to from here.
The motion wouldn't need to be revised because it's general enough, but Sarah has outlined what our plan was, so some direction from council will be helpful. Do we need to have an online virtual session for this one?
Consensus around the table.
Yeah, okay, it looks like no, but we, to Councillor Smith's point, that's not an abandonment of virtual sessions ever, just for this particular engagement, and there will be a pre-recorded one as identified in the engagement section.
Councillor Oikle.
Yes, because of the importance of this, I'm not really comfortable with just having two of the you had recommended two, one north and one south. And we have a huge municipality, and not everybody likes to travel into Bridgewater or into wherever you're thinking of doing it on the south part, because we have all the way like to Blue Rocks and way down in Petite and then way up in whatever's way up there beside, past New Germany, right? Like, it's huge, right? And I'm just thinking more, I don't know how many more, but at least, a few, maybe north, south, east, and west type of a thing, instead of just two.
So to address, maybe it's in each quadrant as opposed to north and south. It's broken in four. Keeping in mind, I don't think we want to lead into December. December is, from what I understand, not the best time to do engagement. There's other things on people's minds. So I'm just looking kind of like for nods around the table for quadrants as opposed to north and south.
And not that it'll change anything, but we also have public engagement planning for October on land conservation identification. So that we're proposing two for that. So just keep that in mind.
I'm seeing nods around the table for the quadrants. So if you could look into that and follow, report back to staff on what that might look like. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you very much to both of you for the presentation.
Thank you.
We'll take a quick 10-minute recess, and when we return, we will have another item under the administration department. Okay, continuing along in our agenda, we have another item under Administration Department, our Strategic Priorities Update, and our Deputy CAO, Alex Demerick, will lead us in this discussion and presentation.
Great. Thank you to the chair. So I will be going over our approved list of council projects today. If you'll recall, almost a year ago now, council established the 5 areas of strategic focus that are up on your screen right now. So we'll be going over work that's happened to date. Oh yeah, it's not, I forgot to send it over to the YouTube stream. Thank you. We're going over work that's been done to date, looking at progress that's been made on the 3rd quarter projects, and an opportunity for any questions or discussion, but there's no decision points required today. It's more of an update. So in terms of work that has happened this quarter, we've seen now the analysis on park washroom types and costs. Council's made a decision on that, and that is now reflected in park standards and the capital projects for this year. Council has approved new cluster development regulations to give guidance on how those are to play out in our regulatory system. Staff have brought forward the feasibility study on the food hub, and council has received and made a decision on that. We've taken delivery of our e-bikes. They are now available for loan from the public. We still have a little bit of work to do in terms of getting that set up in its permanent home, but it is currently available for public use, and we recently received a grant actually for an accessible e-bike to add to the fleet. We also had a presentation from our housing policy team on the uranium mining issue, and staff have completed a comprehensive vehicle purchasing analysis tool. So this will take into account different vehicle types and their life cycle costs so that council can make an informed decision on all future vehicle purchases. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time focusing on the highest priority projects to give council a bit of an update on those. So the first one being comprehensive land use planning. Council is quite familiar with this one as it involves significant public engagement. Where we are right now is staff are working on what we heard report. We are having council discussions on the priority topics, and a second draft of the land use plan is under development. Once it is prepared, it will come to council, and following that, we'll have another round of public engagement. On the transit service, staff submitted route proposals to the town of Bridgewater for the expansion of the town of Bridgewater's transit service into outlying areas close to the boundary between MODL and the town. The town then took that information and looked at reorienting some of their own routes to create routes that made the most sense given the larger service area. And so that work is going back and forth on the staff level. Your CAO is working on the URB requirements, possibly avoiding actually their involvement given the type of expansion that we're looking at, and the project is still on track to be launched in 2026. I don't need to give an update on the housing strategy because that's what we just did. Our Regional Growth Management Committee has now been established, so this involved developing a terms of reference which have been approved by both councils. The initial appointments are done, as well as I believe there have been 2 meetings now, and the priorities for that group have been established by the partner councils. And there will be a session later this fall which will give a bit of an overview to both councils of the development processes and issues, which should be a very useful session and help with intermunicipal collaboration. The Collaborative Health Center and Community Space, as you can see out the window, site preparations, not only site preparations, but also building construction is now underway. Staff continue to work exploring a management partner for the municipal space there. And then self-service, recognizing this is an advocacy project, not a municipally driven initiative. So we were able to conduct a public campaign encouraging residents to identify service gaps through the Build Nova Scotia website. There have been a number of meetings held with MLAs and the MP in order to make sure they're aware of the importance of the issue. And in this fall, we hope to have some meetings with the minister and key department staff to make sure they're aware of the issues that we're experiencing here in MODL, and hope that future versions of Build Nova Scotia's plans involve infrastructure improvements for the district. For the second and third quarter, we have a couple of projects which are ongoing. So we had received a presentation from a civil society group on gender-based violence and how the municipality might respond, and we're targeting a report back to council in October on that. The quality of life and volunteer sector report was presented to council, so we've met the objective that's in the work plan. However, there was lots of discussion and a clear need for more discussion before we establish a kind of action plan on that front. So we hope that over the fall we can bring some more information back to council, and that will help inform some of your strategic planning discussions. There were a couple of fire service governance issues. The Fire and Emergency Services Committee did have quite a successful workshop with committee members and members of the fire service, and then early in the fall an options report was prepared and presented to that committee to look at the code of conduct and the driver training questions. That was well received and is now moved on to the broader fire service for consultation, so we expect that to be completed on the timeline presented. And then on the climate initiatives, we do expect to have that annual report, which has some evaluation measures in it, to you before you engage in your next strategic planning exercise. Just a couple of notes to flag our tax portal implementation. It will be on target. We are intending to do it this fiscal year. We were really hoping that we would have it up and running so it could be used for the fall tax billing, but that's not going to be possible. There were a couple of delays on the vendor side. So we're testing it, and we want to make sure it's fully in place by the end of the fiscal year, and then residents broadly will be able to use it to access their tax information for the spring billing. We've deferred the dog bylaw as a result of the initial discussion, just noting we haven't assigned any resources to it. And similarly, council wanted to increase the priority of the public art policy, recognizing that we weren't getting to the broader arts and culture strategy. So we have noted that, but we currently don't have resources assigned to work on that. So for our next steps, there'll be another update in January of 2025. This status report will help inform the basis of council's strategic priorities work, which is fast coming up upon us. And that strategic planning work will then inform your 2026-27 budget process. So I'm happy to take questions on any individual projects or the process.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you. In earlier discussions, this council had a concern about uranium exploration and sent a letter to the province. While I am aware that some municipalities got a reply, I am not aware that MODL got a reply. I just wondered if anyone could give me an update, if there was one, and if not, are we reasonable to expect one?
Thank you for the question. To my knowledge, we have not received a response like some municipalities have the correspondence sent to the Premier on that issue. And I don't believe the Mayor has received correspondence either. Thank you. And I can't say whether we should expect one. But if we haven't received it yet, I would think we're not going to get one.
Councillor Smith.
I wondered about the training that's done around the lenses, and if any of that can be shared with council, because I would like to know how the lenses are applied, because it seems like we should also be kind of evaluating our work through those lenses. And I know what they are on the website, but I'm just wondering if there's any materials that can be passed on that were created for that training.
The primary feature is actually just including it in the template and then identifying the appropriate staff to go to if you have implications attached to those. Obviously strategic communications goes through Sarah. Our anti-racism and our accessibility coordinators are a resource that are used for that, and then our manager of sustainability is used for climate evaluations. But it really does depend on the issue itself in terms of how it's applied.
Any other comments or feedback from this presentation? This was really an update to bring things forward, and for anybody listening or watching later, there's more details in our agenda package that includes the projects broken down if you would like more details on any of those. Okay. All right, we'll move down to planning and development, and up first we have the proposed municipal boundary adjustment, land transfer from Modal to Town of Lunenburg, and from our planning department we have Ella Gindy to bring that forward.
The Town of Lunenburg.
There, we couldn't hear you in the beginning. If you'd like to just start over, that would be great. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So today we will discuss a proposed municipal boundary adjustment, so land transfer from the municipality of the District of Lunenburg to the Town of Lunenburg. So there's a few maps that I'll show you I guess, so you can visualize it better. So the first one is the current boundary, as you can see. So on June 24, our municipality received a formal request from the Town of Lunenburg to address a boundary anomaly in the Salt Meadows subdivision. The map currently shows the existing boundaries, and you can see Wolf Avenue and Wood Street here. There's some straddle the line, there's the straddle of the line, so it's creating some inconsistencies. So some of the lots are basically in between two boundaries, MODL and the Town of Lunenburg, but and in addition, there's a piece of land that is not within the Town of Lunenburg, but still those roads intersect there. So these inconsistencies, they cause some challenges, especially with bylaw enforcement, property taxation, service delivery, and land use planning. So the request was that 4 parcels, some of them intersecting between the town and MODL, will turn into the Town of Lunenburg completely, and a section here from this larger parcel will turn into being part of a Town of Lunenburg. So you can see 4 parcels. Parcel 3 and 4, even though part of it is within Town of Lunenburg and MODL, we do not tax them. Their complete taxation goes to the Town of Lunenburg to begin with, so that makes the transition even easier. So the proposed change, so if you can see here, this is the current boundary, and this is what is being proposed. So the line will go like this instead. So the adjustment would transfer these 3 parcels fully into the town of Lunenburg and a portion of the larger lot aligning municipal boundaries with the built environment. And although the mutual boundary change is minor in comparison to the land area, it does carry implications for governance and service delivery, so it makes things a bit more straightforward. This change would streamline administration, service coordination, and ensure consistency in planning, taxation, and eliminate residents' confusion. Some of the confusion can be, who do I pay taxes for example? And the financial impact to MODL is minimal, with an estimated annual tax loss of only $146.92. And there's no changes expected to infrastructure or service levels. These are the recommendations to council, to the Policy and Strategy Committee to provide to council.
Thank you
If
for.
there's any questions, I'm here to.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that forward, as well as providing the picture of it. And not only is this having 2 municipal units run through, it's actually a duplex. It goes right through the building. And I realize there's other properties that this is happens to a municipality, but in this case, it's one municipality and the town as opposed to a homeowner. So it's a little bit more easier to go through the process.
Yeah.
Councillor Bell.
A question, please. Can you confirm that this request is coming from the town of Lunenburg and not a private developer?
That request is coming from the town of Lunenburg, and it passed through their council meeting in May.
Councillor Oikel.
Can you identify what the limited public engagement will be for your third request?
Yes. So technically, since it depends on what council will decide to do. If it is a mutual boundary change, it's more straightforward in terms of the process. So technically, if that is the case, public engagement is not needed. However, it is a strategic priority of council to have more transparency and public engagement. So the public planning staff is recommending to have information session to discuss that change and send letters to property owners that are affected by the boundary change.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Brooks.
Just out of curiosity, are there any financial ramifications for either person on either side of that when we redraw the line? Will there be any financial implications for folks on either side of that line?
Since most of the properties there already pay their taxes to the town of Lunenburg, there won't be any significant financial changes. The larger lot will pay, I guess, a small portion of their taxation to the town of Lunenburg. I cannot explicitly say what will be the financial cost, but it wouldn't be. I'm assuming it wouldn't be as significant as it already is zoned as, or the use of it is not as for residential purposes.
This does fall within District 10, and there is a motion on the floor, but where I'm chairing, I would like to put it out for somebody else to bring that motion forward. Mayor McLean-Weil.
To the Chair, Deputy Mayor Vino, and members of the committee, I move that the Policy and Strategy Committee recommends to Council that Municipal Council agree to the boundary line adjustment of the mutual boundary in the Salt Meadows subdivision as requested by the Town of Lunenburg, and further that the Municipal Council authorize the Mayor to submit a joint application with the Town of Lunenburg to the Nova Scotia Regulatory and Appeals Board to approve the requested change of the mutual boundary.
Is there a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Councillor Bell. Any further discussion? Councillor Bell.
Thank you. I'm going to support this motion. My main reason for doing so is that the request is coming from a neighboring municipality and being done so in a good spirit. if this was coming from a private developer or a private individual, I would be reluctant to do so.
All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Hearing that motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. We have another item under Planning and Development, 9.2.2, Repeal and Replace Building Code Bylaw. And we had some discussion at our last council meeting, and this is further to that. More information is being brought forward. And we have Graham Hopkins, our Building Inspection Manager, with us.
Thank you. At the, like you mentioned at the last council meeting, we were there for the second reading for the repeal and replace of bylaw 18, which is the building bylaw. It was referred back to Policies and Strategy Committee for further discussion, specifically dealing with the expiration of building permits. So we went back through our policy and we noted that we weren't very clear with what was happening with existing building permits prior to January of 2026. And they are not affected by this new policy. So we're going to be dealing with the existing building permits the same way we have been for years. If there's no work started or has stopped progressing for over a year, then we would be revoking or canceling the permit, just like we have been already. But with this new policy moving forward, it's only affecting from the January 26th date. So I think that's the gist of what we were talking about. And like I say, under the building bylaw or the building code act, the building officials who have the authority, have in jurisdiction, have the ability to cancel or revoke these permits for that haven't started or because they've stopped work. So if there's any questions from council about this, since there was a lot that came up during the second reading.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying where we were not sure where we were going at the last meeting. Is there any questions or comments for Mr. Hopkins? Councillor Oikel.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you went back and looked at all of that. And I'm just wanting to again, be specific that anyone who presently has a building permit before January, those that haven't done anything, it will most likely be revoked. And those that have, how long do they have to continue on with their work?
That's a good question. So correct. Anybody who has a permit that they haven't started, and I think we did a quick review, and there's about 99 people right now for homes, cottages, dwelling type units. They most likely are going to be, we'll be contacting them, but they'll most likely being revoked. So I think 15 of those permits were in zoned areas, so they had development permits, so which automatically expire. So we'll be contacting those people if we haven't already. And as far as existing permits, if people are actively working on them, we're just going to continue to leave the permit open. It's when they've stopped for a long period of time. Typically, we send out letters as reminders anyway to say that, the final steps, or we haven't heard from you for a bit, where are you at? So if work has stopped, then we will contact them, see what their plan is, and we'll either give them an extension as if work is continuing, or we'll cancel it and give them the instructions of how to reapply for a building permit if they need to.
The key word for me there was actively working, and that satisfies the concerns that I had when it came up last week. So thank you for clarifying that. Not seeing any other hands, so in order for this to continue, the motion on the floor needs to be brought forward. Can I have somebody bring that? Councillor Reinhardt.
To the Chair, Deputy Mayor Vino, and members of the committee, I move that the Policy and Strategy Committee recommends to Council that Municipal Council proceed with second reading and repeal and replace Bylaw 018 Building Code at the September 23rd, 2025 Council meeting.
Moved by Counselor Reinhardt, seconded by Counselor Bell. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you for that. We have no mayors, deputy mayors, or councillor matters to bring forward, no added items, no in camera. Therefore, we'll call this meeting of the Policy and Strategy Committee adjourned. Thank you.